So I touched on a recent video about professional wrestling. I forget which video it was, but I believe I touched on that. And what I want to discuss here is the dark side of professional wrestling because it's an interesting, if depressing, subject. Um, so I've been watching, like I say, my interest in professional wrestling has really been reiterated this year. I was really into wrestling around the WWE, well, WWF as it then was, Attitude Era of the late 90s, early 2000s. Then there was a transition to WWE. I sort of lost interest for a long time. It was always on my radar, but I was far more into boxing for the last sort of 15 years. And literally over the last sort of year and a half, I've once again got back into professional wrestling. But there's a side to it which I'd always known that there was a darker side. I'd always known that there was corruption, there was things that are dubious about the world of professional wrestling. I hadn't realized just how bad it actually can be. And I've been watching a documentary series called Behind the Titantron. Now, these videos get a lot of views. They average about 1 million views each, and they're formatted as documentaries focusing on particular controversies. And I just want to talk about some of these things because I think we view the world of professional wrestling as first and foremost about entertainment, which it is. Whereas boxing is focused on skills, speed, and how good a fighter someone is, more so than entertainment. Wrestling is purely entertainment. Um, yeah, I remember now I made this video about the risk that wrestlers take. It's different. I mean, obviously wrestling is choreographed, it's scripted, but the risks are very real. I mean, these guys and women take serious risks every time they enter the ring. I might go to watch that new film with Dwayne Johnson, Fighting with My Family, which covers the rise of the British wrestler Paige. But anyway, Behind the Titantron really looks at some of the darker sides of the sport. And I would again make the analogy to because wrestlers are on the road, it's very much like circus life. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. It just seems similar in the sense that it's actually quite a hard scrabble industry. There are a lot of things that you can look at. Firstly, there is a staggering number of professional wrestlers who die young. Staggering. Um, every year, there are at least a dozen wrestlers who die, and many of them are, below the age of 60. So there is clearly a very serious problem in the industry that's ongoing. I understand the WWE has taken significant steps. I remember when Chris Jericho and others were discussing the death of Chris Benoit, Larry King asked what measures had been taken in the industry to address mental health issues and so on. Apparently, since the whole Benoit thing, which really blew a hole in the world of wrestling, um, there has been the WWE has paid for rehabilitation, i.e., drug rehabilitation of former performers, former wrestlers in the roster. And there's been other methods the WWE has taken, but I think there is still, clearly there's still a problem in the industry, and I can point to a lot of things. I mean, it's interesting that some wrestlers, when they pass away, they get attention, and it's not necessarily to do with how great they were. I mean, take for example Viscera, Nelson Fraser Jr. I wouldn't say he was a star on the scale of, say, The Rock or Triple H or someone like that, but or Undertaker. But he was still, he was still, I would say, a relatively big draw. Now, when he passed away, there was nothing, and I remember people discussing that at the time. Why has the WWE just ignored this? He was only in his 40s. Um, and almost universally, when these people pass away, it's down to drug complications or a range of issues from heart problems. It's never natural causes, and that's just tragic. Another example is China. Um, the wrestler China, who was groundbreaking for women's wrestling. Her real name was Joni Lawler, Joni Laurie, I think it was. But the world knows her as China, the ninth wonder of the world. I mean, her last years were just sad. She flipped between adult films and drugs, and she tried to supplement her income in Japan, apparently by teaching English, which caught my attention, being an English teacher myself. And there's that famous video now, the viral video of her last days. It's just sad. She was only in her 40s. Um, I do believe that when it comes to drugs, I'm a strong believer in personal responsibility, but I also recognize that drugs are an addiction. I mean, it has to be said, a lot of wrestlers, particularly in the 80s, had pretty reckless lifestyles. And part of this might be a controversial viewpoint, but you could blame the WWE to an extent, but in the end of the day, they were free thinking adults as well. And, if you're going to be a party animal and pop drugs and so on, there's a certain degree of personal responsibility that has to come into that. So I don't agree with blaming the WWE for everything. Having said that, Vince McMahon has pretty much got the reputation in professional wrestling that Don King has in professional boxing. I think the whole industry is very. I mean, look, I don't want to be too negative because this is an industry that has entertained tens of millions of people for decades. It's provided a lot of entertainment, um, and that side of it can't be overlooked. And there is a huge amount of benevolence. I mean, professional wrestlers do more for charity than many other figures in the entertainment industries, plural. Um, But I just don't think that dark side can be ignored. And I give Behind the Titantron respect for raising these issues. Another one they covered was the Von Erichs. The Von Erichs were a Texas based family. Now, they were before the time that I was interested in it, but just from watching this documentary, that was a complete tragedy. Um, Almost without exception, I think there's one surviving brother. There were four or five brothers. Five. Four of them died young, either from, well, the first brother, I believe it was Mike Von Erich, died of a drug overdose in a Tokyo hotel, and the other three brothers committed suicide. I mean, that's just staggering for one family. And the father, Fritz Von Erich, died after his sons. There's only one son still alive. I mean, that family really is the epitome of tragedy in professional wrestling. Um, I sort of think the remaining brother, I forget his name, but it's almost like he's trying to defy this curse. But there's many other examples. Even the issue of hazing, I think needs to be seriously explored. Obviously, by nature, professional wrestling is a very macho sport because you're talking about big guys, particularly in the 80s. And I would say also in recent years, in the Attitude Era as well. You know, with all due respect to Chris Jericho and others who say that being big is not the main factor, I'm a little skeptical of that because I think in the 80s it was like just being like bodybuilders, these huge guys, Randy Savage, Hulk Hogan, and so on. With that came enormous pressure. Without doubt, steroid use was rife. The Ultimate Warrior is another example. That was rife, and there's certainly more restrictions nowadays, but which is a good thing. But I think there is definitely problems, for example, with hazing and bullying in the industry. I mean, there's a video. It wasn't Behind the Titantron. It was another documentary, WrestleMania, I think the channel's called, and they covered something like 10 times where rookies were punished for disrespecting veterans, i.e., when new wrestlers, guys who'd been brought from the independent circuit into the WWE, were punished by the company for perceived insults to guys that were long term veterans. Now, I sort of understand that in any new job, you can look at this in any aspect of life. If you're a new kid and you you're disrespectful to someone who's long held sort of, I'd make an analogy in the boxing world. Let's say you had an up and coming fighter and he disrespected someone like Vladimir Klitschko or Muhammad Ali or Lennox Lewis, then it wouldn't go down too well. So I guess it's a similar principle. But some of the things that they were talking about were just seemed incredibly petty, whereby there was one example, I think it was a Blue Meanie. He accidentally, or rather, he got a plane ticket. This is when he'd just been accepted into the WWE, and it was a last minute thing, so they gave him a first class ticket. Now, apparently, that was for the A-lister guys on the roster, and apparently they gave him a hard time because he got had the wrong ticket, and that was the reason for the whole feud with JBL. Now, if that's true, that is just so petty. There's other examples of seasoned professional veteran wrestlers giving you guys a hard time over the most ridiculous of reasons. I mean, we rightly see hazing in the military in a very negative way, and we should. So why should it be any different in the world of wrestling? How is this industry meant to attract new talent if that new talent thinks that they're just going to be, pushed around and bullied when they get into the company? To me, an inspiring figure would be someone who encourages young wrestlers, who, lifts them up, not tears them down. I have no respect for that sort of attitude. And it seems to be, it's a lot more common in the world of the WWE in particular than I expected. And that's just really unfortunate because we look at professional wrestlers. I don't believe in hero worship, but there's this, people look up to them. They are like real life superheroes. So if that's going on behind the scenes, it's pathetic. And I think the WWE needs to introduce a code of conduct. Okay, new guys need to respect veterans, but it should work both ways. So I think there's a lot of things like this that need to be really scrutinized. And I'm not sure if Vince McMahon's prepared to do that. Also, there's certain storylines that are just kayfabe pitches that are just, you wonder, well, what the hell? What sort of storyline is this? I mean, the whole thing about wrestling, it's meant to be nonsense. It's meant to be ridiculous. But there's times I think definitely there's lines being crossed. Apparently, Vince McMahon, assuming these documentaries are correct, at one point even proposed introducing an incest story. Understandably, Shane and Stephanie McMahon were absolutely dead set against that idea. Now, I should say this came from a message board that I came across, so I don't know how accurate that is, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's true. Anyway, I'd be a liar if I said I was a massive wrestling fan. I'm not. So really, this video is for WWE hardcore fans. What do you think? Do you think that there is enough corruption in the industry and enough of a problem for there really to serious forms to be reforms to be needed, or do you think it's all exaggerated? I mean, my take based on these documentaries is there's a very serious problem going on. Why is it so many wrestlers end up drug dependent? Is it the pressure that they're under with the constant moving around? The constant pressure to be performers. Well, if that was the case, then we would see every actor in Hollywood would be a drug addict. They're also under pressure, you know, but that's not the case. So why is it wrestling is so affected by this? Because we're not talking one or two people. This seems to be rife in the industry, assuming behind the Titantron is accurate. And I see no reason why it isn't. They seem to do their homework. Um, every year I hear of another wrestler dying that I thought, whoa, I knew that guy from the WWE Attitude Era. I mean, I just found out that Brian Christopher died, i.e., one half of Too Cool. He played Grandmaster Sexy. That was his kayfabe role. I mean, this is just happening all the time, and there's clearly something very wrong in the industry. I think I remember George Chuvalo, the son of the great Canadian boxer George Chuvalo, mentioned that what needs to be analysed in the world of boxing is the sort of damage that's inflicted in the gym, not necessarily in fights themselves, but in the gym. Now, maybe it's the same in the world of wrestling. We don't know the full story of what goes on in the gym. There was a notorious incident in 1988. A wrestler was actually murdered, Bruiser Brody. But there's other examples of corruption. There was a guy called, I forget his name now, Jake something. Not Jake the Snake. This guy was from the independent circuit, but he basically stabbed a man 19 times, an older wrestler, and this was not one of those blades they keep in the the roll up. This was he actually stabbed the guy 19 times. He served 3 weeks on the grounds that another wrestler proposed to train him properly. Now that is a perverse travesty of justice. That is a dangerous individual who belongs in prison. And I wish I remembered the guy's name now because it was a very notorious incident. Jake, something like that. I forget now. He was from the independent circuit. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there, but I don't want to be too negative. Wrestling is clearly a very entertaining sport. It's colorful, it's entertaining, it's over the top, it's larger than life. That's why people love it, and I think that's going to continue. But the industry clearly needs to look after its roster much better than it does. I think the WWE's made some improvements, to be fair, but clearly there is a problem in this industry. Let me know your thoughts.